Welcome, everyone, to Americans for Limited Government live stream. I'm Catherine Mortensen, and as you can see, joining me today is Rick Manning, the president, my boss at Americans for Limited Government. And Rick, thank you so much for coming on with me today. I know you've been doing these daily for the past couple of weeks. We're trying this out as a new format, just kind of get a feel for what our followers, what our supporters like to see, what they want us to be talking about on YouTube. And one thing I wanted to experiment with a little bit today is bringing on some video into our chat today. So in a little bit, when we get to that portion of the broadcast, I will bring on some video and we'll see how that works. But the first thing I want to talk to you about today, and you and I, this was the first topic of conversation we had in the office this morning, was is Biden's presidency hanging by a thread? Is his domestic agenda in peril right now? And the reason I ask this is because several news reporters are starting to write about it, really in light of the two major spending bills that have been moving their way through the House and Senate. And of course, the House right now remains in recess, so they're not voting on anything right now. But the question is can these bills both get to the president's desk in time before this congressional session ends? And they face some very tough deadlines. One Hill watcher described it as a Rubik's Cube on steroids. And the reason that is because Nancy Pelosi has tied those two spending bills together in order to satisfy the AOC wing of the party. She has promised that the two will go together. They won't be one and then the other. So why don't you explain a little bit about what the two bills are and why has she tied them together? And what does this mean for Biden? Can they both get passed?
Well, that's a pretty huge question. Okay, so the two bills. Number one was the infrastructure bill that passed with bipartisan support over Americans for Limited Government's opposition. It's about $600 million in addition, or $1 billion in deficit spending. And the reason it got bipartisan support is because it's a lot of bridges, it's the internet. There's some things in it that are really disturbing, but by and large, it's something that looked a lot like your standard infrastructure bill, where everybody gets something, and consequently, the American people get the bill. And but it's typical politics. So that's the first bill. That bill has been tied. That passage of that bill, both the House and the Senate, but not in the same form, has been held up in the House of Representatives by Nancy Pelosi at the behest of the radical AOC wing of her party, which actually looks like it's consisting of a majority of their party. So they held that up, saying, we'll let the pass that the Republicans want, but they have to let the $3.5 trillion boondoggle that's also supposedly infrastructure pass as well. And if that doesn't happen, if the Senate doesn't deliver on the $3.5 trillion bill, then we're going to take the $1.2 trillion one down. That's the tie-in. And it wasn't Pelosi who tied it. There was a big press conference at the White House where Republicans and senators were standing around clapping each other on the back on how they decided to spend a bunch more of our money and how excited they were about it. And 2 hours after Joe Biden had that event, he announced, hey, guess what? I'm not going to sign the bill, the $1.2 trillion bill, unless the $3.5 trillion bill arrives on my desk simultaneously. So that's the Rubik's Cube. But understand, it's a September 27 deadline is purely artificial. It was a non-binding deadline for passage of the $1.2 trillion bill. Non-binding deadline, that means they don't have to do it. That was put in place to get votes of some of the so-called moderate Democrats, not that there are any, but that's what Washington, D.C. would cast them as. For some of the Democrats who are concerned that they might lose their general election. And so they wanted to get guarantee that that there would be a House vote on the $1.2 trillion within a certain deadline. That is a non-meeting deadline. So it's artificial and can be blown up, and everybody will nod their head and say it's okay. A deadline that matters is the September 30th end of the fiscal year. The reason the end of the fiscal year deadline matters is because under budget reconciliation, I know this is getting really complicated, but under budget reconciliation, you can do this twice a fiscal year. Fiscal year in federal government terms is October 1 to September 30th. And the Democrats want to do it twice more next year. All the budget reconciliation means is that if you get 50 votes in the Senate or 51 votes with the vice president, you get 51 votes with the vice president, you can pass whatever you want without the other party having any say so, as long as it deals with spending and the budget. And so that's what budget reconciliation is. You get 2 of those every fiscal year. And this would blow 1 for this year if it doesn't pass by September 30th. And they'd have to use one of next year's budget reconciliation slots to pass this.
So
very
okay,
simply. Yeah.
So it's super complicated. That's why one observer described it as a Rubik's Cube on steroids. So what is your best guess or expert analysis? Do you think that they're going to get both of these bills to the president's desk? Or could this whole thing just blow up on him? Because, I mean, he's very unpopular in the polls. We have a lot of these Democrats will be facing their election a year from now in the midterms. Do they really want to be doing a favor to him and being tied to him when they face reelection?
The answer to the question is I think they do the $1.2 trillion bill. I think the $3.5 trillion faces a lot more of a challenge. The initial, so I think they get the $1.2 trillion bill pushed through. There's enough Republican votes to be able to do that as a standalone. And so we'll see. But those Republicans now are peeling away because they don't want to be blamed for the $3.5 trillion bill passing. So that's the reality. I think $1 trillion passes. The 3.5 trillion is a different story. It is right now, there's a lot of conversation. Joe Manchin's at the forefront of it about the amount of money that's being spent. And why that matters is the $3.5 trillion bill has to be offset with either other budget cuts or more taxes. This thing's all taxes, okay? $3.5 trillion of more taxes over the next 10 years. So if they cut the amount of money that's spent, say, in half, they can cut the taxes that they have to increase in half to pay for it. Now, so that's the part of the spending part, the taxing part. The part that's really of concern is the part that has all of the hundreds of little dictates that they have in it. One, I'll just say really quick, and then everybody will understand, be shocked that this kind of thing's in it. In the IRS funding, they're going to put a whole lot more money, so they get 40 to 50, 60,000 more IRS agents out of this bill. But they would also require that all the banks, on an annual basis, once a year, provide all of the records for all of the bank accounts that they hold, that people have in their banks, that have at least $600 passed through them in the course of the last year. Basically, every bank in America can be turned over to their banks for them to evaluate the people when they shot it. This is a control mechanism that the IRS is trying to put in place, that the Biden administration is trying to put in place. And with the cancel culture that we have going on right now, it is a dangerous weapon put in the hands of the same people who went after conservative conflicts at the behest of a White House that was desperate to punish its political enemies.
Thank you, Rick. I want to switch gears just a bit and show you some video from the Justice for the J6 rally that was just happened Saturday in Washington, D.C., which you probably saw, got a lot of media attention ahead of time. The law enforcement, the media were predicting it was going to be just some sort of out of control, violent event. And of course, it did not turn out to be that. President Trump was, in fact, urging his supporters not to go. He was calling it a setup. And there were many reports that there were more members of the media and more members of law enforcement there than there were actual attendees. So let's see what we get here if we watch some video. This was taken at the event.
Any of our countrymen and women being held charged with insurrection? The answer is no.
You I demanded your respect, you're kind to, you're respectful to, you're obedient. And they're going to keep us safe. We're counting on them to do that. And we know that they will.
And check out this one here. I'll explain what we're looking at in a minute.
Just here. Where'd you have the guys at? It's on the everything all good? You already verified? Back up.
What's your name?
Working? No.
9:35.
So it's kind of hard to hear what was happening there. But that video, that second one, has gone viral because many are claiming that the person detained there was an undercover federal agent, possibly FBI, who was posing as a Proud Boy and trying to infiltrate the event. And the law enforcement had surrounded him and they thought they were going to detain him. And then they checked his ID. And so there's sort of this narrative pushed out there in the conservative world that this was infiltrated again by the FBI, like some of these other events we've seen. And it just feeds into that fundamental distrust that so many Americans have of the federal government and our FBI in particular right now.
Well, it's well stated and well held to have that business. Here's the fact. The FBI, it's not infiltrating. They were part and parcel of the event. In order to get isolated and arrested, you had to be doing something to incite people to do stuff. And so if, as it appears, an FBI undercover agent was inciting people to try to get them to do something that would cause a mass arrest event, then it is exactly what many people have felt the FBI have done on a number of occasions, where they were actually the people who put together. And in the case of the remember the case of the Michigan governor, where some guys were supposedly going to try to kidnap the governor. And in the trial, it's turning out that half of the people who were part of the cabal were all FBI agents or informants. And they were the ones who actually put the cabal together and arranged the group and recruited people and essentially used it as a way to try to incite people to do something they would never have done on their own. Well, that's what is alleged here. And I think it's well served to see that, yes, the FBI was there. They were there in mass. Though the FBI has learned that if they want to mix in, they shouldn't wear white shirts. Mixing, so they look a little bit like everybody else. But the fact is, you had a bunch of people who basically got their clothes from the same costumer, and they all looked alike. The FBI people all looked alike, and they didn't look anything like a Trump crowd. So it was pretty interesting. Going to the first video, and I think it was really fun to look at it because for a Trump crowd, look at how they're socially distancing. Lots of social distancing going on. Very few people crowded all together. Lots of 6 feet aparters. I have to say that that's a pretty respectful crowd of all those Fauci rules. So it's get right down to it. That is their unruly mob that they wanted to incite into doing something bad so they can claim that the January 6th event lived on. And the fact is...
And that video here that we're seeing, you can also just look, and there appear to be more people with cameras and recording gear than, and notepads. So it was really like a reporter event more so than an attendee event. I mean, more reporters showed up. Years ago, I was a local news reporter, and of course, you get invited to protests and rallies every day of the week. And our rule of thumb was when we showed up, we said, if there's more reporters here than there are protesters, then we're packing up. This isn't legit, right? And that's what this was. There were more members of the press than there were actual attendees. So by my old rules, we would have packed it up and called it a day.
Second, yeah, absolutely. It was a non-event, and you saw the second video, and you saw that those police or whatever they were wearing. It was like they were gladiators from the way back when, and such heavy arms and armament that you sit there and you go, they were probably like 5'11", 185, 185, all that stuff.
What happened?
But it looked like wearing pounds of. So I hate to, not a very agile looking outfit that they're wearing, but
No.
just struck me how much, how geared up they were compared to what we saw on January 6th, where they were basically letting people in the Capitol building like they were visitors.
And taking selfies with them, right? So
Yes.
the last thing I want to ask you about is the redistricting that's happening. It happens every 10 years after the census, and it's done by the state legislatures in all 50 states, and then they control the districts for the congressional, U.S. congressional districts. And what we're seeing in one state, for example, Colorado, which I was an elected official in Colorado and on the city council in Canyon City, Colorado. And I have long admired Representative Lauren Boebert. She, of course, is just fabulous voice for limited government and conservative values on Capitol Hill. But she has been pushed into a district by the Democrats in their state such that in the next go round, a year from now, when she is up for re-election, she will have to get elected in the Boulder, Colorado, the most liberal district, perhaps outside of San Francisco or Cambridge, Massachusetts. Boulder, Colorado now will be voting in Lauren's district. Those will be her constituents if this Democrat redistricting plan is allowed to go forward. I imagine we're going to see a lot of this in the next few months as these state legislatures in these Democrat-controlled states try to push out Republicans.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And Congresswoman Boebert has an option to. She can move. Really, they basically just draw her town to the district. She could move to a different town that's nearby and represent most of her old constituents. That's an option. She could run for a statewide office, or she can run in the district that's drawn. And that's a choice she's going to have to make. Similarly, in Illinois, Adam Kinzinger, who voted for the impeachment of President Trump, the supermajority Democrat majority in the Illinois state legislature, appears to be about to draw his district and basically blow it apart. So his district really won't exist at all. They lose one congressional district. So one of the congressional districts had to go. His district's going to be the one. They need to, at least it appears as though, they want to shore up a couple of Democrats and get him some Democrats out of his district, and they're going to load the Republicans into another district. And the fact is, Kinzinger isn't very popular amongst a lot of those Republicans, and as a result, he can't win a primary in another district. And they need to blow up his district because he was stronger in the general election than he was in the primary, and so they didn't want to put him in a district one of the Democrats. So that's happening in Illinois. We're seeing this across the country. It's something to watch as the makeup of the House of Delegates or House of Representatives gets remade. And it's why people want to talk about what they think is going to happen and how many seats the Republicans are going to pick up or how many seats the Democrats are going to pick up at this juncture really don't know what they're talking about, because every single district is going to be redrawn. Every single 435 are being redrawn. And I don't know what the map looks like in California. I don't know what the map's going to look like in Texas. I don't know what it's going to look like in Florida. But rest assured that those states that are getting more seats there's 8 more districts that are going to be in Republican states than they're being taken from Democrat states, because the population shift from places like California, which lost 1 seat, the population shift has been south and east. And so you've got Illinois lost a seat, Pennsylvania lost a seat. So you're looking at a shift of the district, but also just electoral votes from ostensibly Democrat states to ostensibly Republican states, which shifts the electoral college map as well. And so for 2024, it has a huge impact as well. So, but that's what's happening right now. Yes, Representative Boebert's going to have to make a choice. I would recommend she move a couple of towns over, because she represents rural Colorado so well and is an extraordinary representative, does a great job. And it'd be a shame to lose her, because the Democrats are so afraid of her that they stuck her into Boulder. That's why they did it. They want to drive her out because she scares them, because she's a powerful representative for the people of Colorado.
She sure is, yes. So thank you, Rick. I know you have to run. You've got some other commitments to make. So thank you for your analysis, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. And you can see that we're able to put up your comments in real time. So if any of you are watching in the future, feel free to comment on Facebook or YouTube. We're also going to be getting these videos up live on Rumble, which will be a fabulous platform and has been very good for us. So please join in and comment and subscribe to our channel on Rumble and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.